idea of measuring the ROI, right? Because I think a lot of that is like, what is the value of that time? Like, why should I take myself away from selling more widgets and making more widgets, whatever the case is, and invest that in training? And as learning professionals, we always have to justify everything we want to do with, the spend with ROI on that. So, I know, Dominic, this was something that we talked about a lot. You mentioned your leadership team is starting to see training as less of a liability. And Alec, you talked about learning equals dollars, and this idea of like onboarding being so expensive, and you use that as the cost saving of not having to onboard people. What other ideas, what other ways, successes, challenges you guys had around this idea of like motivating the spend to justify the ROI?
I mean,
go ahead, PJ. I'm so bad.
So here's what I'll say is, I think I've been talking to some executive coaches who are like, how do you, show the ROI when all these coaching platforms, etc. And they kind of go back to, well, what's the success criteria for that, executive who's being coached, and how does that align? Like, it's really hard personally to kind of think about that, going from reaction to learning to behavior to ROI. Like, I feel like I get to the behavior change, but never to the ROI. And I've been trying to figure out, like, would our leaders care that I can prove that what's the ROI on that? I've been trying to figure that out. I've been really trying to figure out, the quality of learning, etc. They haven't asked for it yet. That's what I will say. So I haven't really been measuring. I've been trying to figure out where and how do our programs have an impact on the employee experience. Like, what moments does learning or our programs or experiences make the most sense to help amplify or contribute to that person's experience at the company, or what fuels their engagement? Because I think I probably will never be able to truly say, like, this executive, this learner, or this leader, because they went to our programs, they helped us save this much money. Because I don't work in manufacturing, right? It's just hard. What I will say, I have been trying to figure out what actually has the highest impact on engagement. And what we found at PagerDuty is, one is if someone's already working remotely. Our remote employees are our highest engaged employees at PD. Second is someone's proximity to leaders. So if they get exposed to them, are they in the same rooms with them or Zooms with them? And then lastly is like the proximity of that person to headquarters. So we found that our EMEA and our APJ offices were the least engaged because they're the furthest away from headquarters, which is strange. So when I think about that, I think about, like, how can we amplify or create the best kind of like valuable experience when some people do come together. So we try to make sure that they are able to connect with, like, for our executive program, we are going to have our CEO and our CPO as part of the kickoff experiences. So we're trying to close that gap. We're going to equalize the experience so everyone's remote, they can learn where they are. And we're going to try to forge, relationships across each cohort to ensure that there's that cross-functional relationship building. So in my head, I'm trying to make sure, if I had to measure the value of that program from an experiential standpoint, someone will leave knowing that it was worth it, But right now, I feel like I'm probably 2-3 years away from truly saying, this leader who did all the things was able to make us this much money. Like, I gotta be real. Like, I just got to the point where we can start to see trends of our learning participation. We're probably 2-3 years away from the ROI measure. I've been real with our CPO about that.
And I think, I don't know, it's like, in some ways, I think it's, I don't know, it's almost an impossible ask, right? Because it's, I mean, you mentioned already, like, it's essential, but it's so far, like, removed in the chain. Like, the training piece might happen here, and then the actual execution might happen, there might be 3 or 4 steps between the training and the actual kind of full realization of a program. What I think about, and I guess try to tie, because, you know, I mean, I guess I'm more actively like selling some trainings to sometimes to people like yourselves, quite honestly, is this, we know what business initiative is this supporting, right? Like, so what, you know, if you're going to be, you know, if you're going to shell out the cash to do training with us, you know, what is that enabling you to do? And what, you know, so what's the business imperative that's driving, you know, your need to execute this training? And I think that can be applied to internal training as well. It may not be a direct, you know, one-to-one, okay, if we do this, we pull this lever, you know, and then ROI comes out, you know, money comes out the other side. But it's kind of, it's an enabler for, you know, it's a piece of the puzzle in terms of enabling an initiative. So like, I think a lot about for our stuff is supporting kind of digital transformation and or modernization of practices, right? So as people are maybe looking to, you know, they're looking to start to build a mobile team, they don't have that expertise in house, for example, right? And so this is a way for them to get from point A to point B, and so our, you know, our piece is a stop on that journey. So it may not be able to say, okay, well, if you spent this much, you know, here is exactly the, you know, the specific ROI that you're getting. But, you know, if you, it's sort of, it's almost like a taking away, like helping them understand why it's not safe to stand still, right? Or it's like, it's, if you don't do the training, then you're the business imperative you want to, you know, execute on, you're not going to be able to do it because the team doesn't have the skills, doesn't have the knowledge, doesn't, whatever it is, whatever they're lacking to be able to execute that.
In some cases, it's looking at the cost of avoidance. So what is it going to cost you if you don't do the training, and then bringing that in almost from a risk standpoint. That's another way to back into the ROI or potential ROI. Because you're looking at time to proficiency. So if you don't do it, you've got to learn new skills, then and you've got to bring in a consultant. You've got these extra overhead costs that are going to come into play, where you could do the training for less amount and then measure the skills and coach appropriately. So how fast can they come up to speed, and then bring that cost in? Because otherwise you could be out there forever.
Dominic, you mentioned how when we last spoke, how your leadership team was seeing training as less of a liability. Was there any like specifics around that you can share? That
a lot of it is in relation to how we had to pivot due to COVID. Our service model, or I should say our business model, really ties in with face-to-face relationships with our clients and their employees. And given the fact with shutdowns and things like that, a good portion of our service model turned virtual out of necessity. And that required a great deal of, it required creating new service lines based on this virtual platform. It required obviously the skill sets of our people. We have a very wide demographic of employees. We're a clinically a medical based work group. A lot of people do not have the the skill sets opening up a Zoom meeting and running a Zoom meeting or going into our SharePoint site. It's you know, it's when we talk about having our subject matter experts, you know, engaging them in developing stuff. We got people who've never used PowerPoint. So it's like, okay, so when I talked about how our leadership team was starting to recognize the value of this, we literally saw mid-March, we were at the precipice given everything that was going on, but we were able to show over the remainder of the month through April through May that because of that rapid pivot in our services, the rapid training required to change that, to instigate that pivot, it saved, it really did. It saved the company. and it allowed for us to weather this storm pretty effectively. We are also now starting to see, much like everyone else has been speaking on, the need for keeping our people engaged with learning opportunities. Alec, you had touched on it with now people are looking to find that next step in their career, whether ping-ponging within an organization or elsewhere. So, when we talk about having all of these offerings and trying to figure out new ways of bringing in or collaborating with the external content providers. I just had a conversation with my CEO last week, and he was telling me how above and beyond the coaching and mentoring that the company is providing to leadership level, he's actually going to be starting to work with another group on additional leadership training and figuring out a way in which that can be shared with the rest of the organization. So a lot of it was a organizational maturity standpoint. We were at a certain point. We weren't where we needed to be, in my mind, from a learning culture, but now we're there. And now that we've seen the ability to rapidly pivot and the results of that.